we're here to present what I hope to be a super interesting panel, Cloud Security Operations and Threat Detections. My name is Andrew Wertkin. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at BlueCat, where we're focused on network security, both in the sort of traditional on-premises domain as well as the cloud domain. And I am joined here by a fantastic panel. And so I'm going to ask each of you just to briefly introduce yourselves. I'm just going to go from my right to left and how I see things. So, Marcos, why don't we start with you?
Hello, I'm Marcos Santiago. I'm a security architect for Thomson Reuters.
And Cathal?
Hi there, everyone. My name is Cathal. I'm Director of JSOC Analytics within RBC. JSOC Analytics is a machine learning research team that develops solutions in the cyber and financial crime space for the bank.
Fantastic. And Erkang?
Hello, everyone. Erkang Zheng. I am the founder and CEO of JupiterOne, which is a cloud-native asset management and cybersecurity governance platform. I was former CISO myself and head of security for several companies prior to starting my own.
Fantastic. So we're gonna touch a few different aspects of this broad area. One sort of on the organizational side, we'll talk about strategy, tactics and practices, and in skill sets as well. So I'll start with a fairly general question. So what organizational factors can make or break a cloud security strategy? Marcos, do you want to jump in and try?
Sure. Strategy is the fancy word for planning. So I think the lack of strategy is one of the main issues. I see myself as a combination of business goals and technology goals, and very clear reasons why any organization may want to go to the cloud. I have heard people complaining, we went to the cloud and we didn't save any money. Or I went to the cloud and now, we're basically at the same state that we had before. They don't see a clear advantage. And part of that problem is because perhaps they started that journey without a clear goal or objective of what we're trying to accomplish. And I think it has to be full of purpose. We're moving to the cloud, has to be a strategy, a plan, and certain notes that you have to hit to get it right. And if you don't have that clearness, that clarity at the beginning, then at the end, you're in the middle of that journey, you're going to realize this is not going the way I want it.
Yeah, and I think we always see oftentimes these strategies starting at a very tactical level, where maybe one business decides to start going that way without sort of broad organizational awareness and buy-in. And so that's why I'm sort of asking also on the organizational side, like oftentimes it's not just business as usual. There's some core organization changes that might need to be made to organize or align that strategy. Cal or Erkang, do you have any?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Erkang.
Yeah, I have a couple of things to offer, right? So I actually personally was part of a pretty large digital transformation for a major financial organization at one point. And I think a couple of the challenges I've experienced myself organizationally, one is trying to do too much and anticipating that cloud will solve all your problems, and it won't, right? And especially if you have a lot of legacy technical debt, by moving to the cloud, especially if you start with a lift and shift type of strategy, that won't solve any of those, right? So it won't reduce any technical debt that's already there. It probably will compound because things are different. So design the right strategy, right? So the other thing is on the organizational factor is that we have to understand the shared responsibility model, especially when it comes to cloud security. And I think there's often a disconnect between business and engineering and security as far as how fast things can move. And if that's not aligned, then we're going to run into constant frictions that business and engineering try to do something, security doesn't have the visibility and trying to say no, that's just not going to go in very fast.
Right. No, for sure. For sure.
And I think I'd echo like what you're saying there, Erkang, in from a data science perspective. If we take a to how we're monitoring activity, like if we're looking for anomalous behavior and anomalous access, anomalous data exfiltration, if we do that siloed, that's not beneficial. It doesn't scale. When you're in the cloud, you potentially have a lot more data to deal with. And so what you really have to do is integrate all of your analytics and actually have those insights shared. And likewise with the cloud provider, be integrating with their insights and not have them isolated from each other, because as you scale up the number of monitoring that you have, then the number of false positives you're going to have is going to scale up with that as well. So you need to bring in these insights in together and correlate them and have that to, like, bubble the true positives to the top.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, right? So all of these is a lot of a continuous learning process for organizations going into it. I think the biggest challenge organizationally is probably the culture of trusting each other, right? So because especially in larger organizations, sometimes it feels like we're trying to go against each other with different competing priorities and agenda, and I don't think that needs to be the case, right? So if we all come together and say, hey, we're both learning from this, right? Engineering is learning from security is learning from engineering, and have some empathy towards each other, right? So I think that will go a long way.
Yeah, huge. I mean, that sort of conflict and lack of collaboration can certainly cause a bunch of issues. One thing I heard sort of all of you say differently, which I think is critical. It's funny because we're talking about the cloud, and you all stressed sort of planning and architecture and strategy and things that need to be thought of ahead of time. And oftentimes when people think sort of initially about the cloud, they're like, greenfield, fast, we can do everything right away. Like we don't agile is important and critical, but the point is the opportunity to create chaos can be pretty large without that architecture. But the key is, and I heard you say this in multiple ways, is architecting and designing, assuming there's going to be like a high velocity of change versus something static that you're going to plan on using for X number of years, because that, I think, velocity of change, acceleration of change, whatever, is part of what creates that friction. There's this expectation that things can change right away, and they often can't, and that creates stress and friction, and frankly can become personal across the two different domains.
That's right. It's a bit of both, actually, right? So I think what I've experienced is that for security teams, right, security practitioners, I think to some extent less change is good, right? So for many years, right, so we strived on things being consistent, right? So that's why we do once a year pen tests, because hey, things only change once a year, right? Major changes, then that's good, right? If nothing changes, our job's a lot easier. But at the same time, I think we as the security teams needs to embrace this new era more, right? We need to kind of think like the engineers, right? Think with automation, think with code and APIs to transition and transform security operations as well.
Right. Yeah. Totally agree. That leads perfectly to sort of where we want to start talking about, which is how are the approaches different across these different domains, between the more maybe traditional perimeter-based or otherwise on-premises versus how one would look at security from a cloud perspective?
So I think I'm going to go in from the data science again point of view, and which is obviously not as keenly expert as Erkang and Marcus here, but a lot of talk is about assume breach mentality and zero philosophy, zero trust, and these kind of philosophies are brought in now a lot in conversation with cloud. But I think this is just a natural evolution, because we no longer have perimeter security really in the cloud, and it's a lot more porous. So it really makes sense that we progress towards that. But it's not that it's incompatible with prior security setups. I think it's just, like I said, a natural evolution. So as our environments get more complex and more integrated, we have to really, head towards these approaches.
And maybe even abstract
also,
from machine learning.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're basically saying is data intensive approaches. You need to know what's happening. You need to have all the signals.
Yes, and I think when it's really interesting you mentioned the signals, because the signals are key here, because data isn't the signal, right? The signal is buried within that data, and so you really have to work with your threat hunters to find that telemetry, to really induce that bias into your model to actually give it that jump start, so that it's actually able to grok the important details that are buried within there. So working really tightly with the domain experts, data scientists, threat hunters, speaking the same language is really, really key here now that the threat service is so much bigger.
Yeah, I want to mention that it may also depend on the size of the organization. Smaller organization, the startup, maybe they are going to embrace the cloud faster, and they're going to go for native services that already exist in the cloud. Bigger, larger organizations, we still have the problem of momentum or inertia, that we want to keep the capabilities that we have in-house, and we want to do it the same. So if we're doing detection in-house, or we have some kind of correlation engine, or we have some kind of threat intelligence process that we have been doing like this for the last 10 years, when we go to the cloud, we don't want it to change. We want to keep doing the same. And there are definitely adjustments that have to be done to every capability because the environment, the platform is different. So there's a big change, and maybe smaller organizations, they have the advantage, and maybe larger organizations, we still have to break the culture, and it's a bigger change.
So if you ask me what's different, right? So I think it can be summarized down to one thing. The one thing that is different between operating in the traditional on-premises based versus in cloud is that everything now is software defined, right? So it's code driven, it's API driven. You don't go logging to a physical server somewhere, or plug in cable or rack a firewall or do things like that, right? So to drive your security and build your perimeters. And the boundary, there is still boundary, but the boundary is at the data layer. The boundary is at the identity layer, right? The boundary is not at the network layer, right? Even at the network layer, network themselves are software defined, right? So all of these, to me, the major changes and the differences when it comes to cloud security is we have to understand how to operate in a software defined world, right? So now to kind of extend that a little bit, right? So it feels like, oh my God, this is so complicated. Well, to some extent it is, right? Because we have microservices, we have containers and serverless functions and all sorts of things, right? So layers of abstraction from the applications down to the infrastructure, there's just too much. And there's, many things in between that is really difficult to understand because it's now opaque, right? It's just not, you don't own it, you don't manage it. It's all cloud service providers and, many things in between. But I think we actually have an opportunity to simplify that, right? So to me, the way I think about this is, look, what is it that we're trying to protect? Let's just think about anything as things, right? So things that we're trying to protect, anything that is software defined, a Lambda function in AWS is a thing, right? A code repo in GitHub is a thing. A Slack user is a thing. A endpoint device, a laptop is a thing. If you just think about that, right? So as operational entities that can be represented in a software defined way, and and somehow use automation to collect and understand them, and then we can actually starting to simplify
it. That really. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the automation to collect and understand is the hard part. I'll be honest, like that's the world that I live in, but it's also the fun part. So yes, sorry, Andrew.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say Erkang can help you with that problem, I think. But this I agree. It's a great point. I mean, yes, it's all software defined, and the constructs for security can be and should be at that higher level, which is fantastic. And you also, right, but a lot of it goes back to development. Is it a lift and shift? Are we re-architecting? How are we developing? And how can we embed the right practices into that side as well? I mean, if we can have a bunch of stateless services where they're immutable and unchangeable, that's a good thing from a security strategy. So I'm curious what your thoughts on in terms of assuming applications are being engineered for the cloud or re-architected for the cloud versus just lift and shift. How this impacts the application development process.
Yeah, let me give the example of my job today, that there was an interest to migrate the systems to the cloud, but there was no interest to do the infrastructure as a mirror, that I call. Whatever you have in the data center today is what you're going to have in the cloud. And if you have a server here, then we're going to do a virtual machine and we have a server there, and we replicate everything the way it is. The mandate was to take advantage of microservices and to build continuous integration, development, testing in the cloud. So yeah, development is going to be a huge change, and it's going to be a journey. It's going to be a cultural change, and we are going to introduce new tools. It's going to change dramatically the way we do things, and it's not going to be easy. We are thinking it may take years. We're talking about maybe 2-3 years before we get it right. So the change I wish we would do, we are actually doing it. The company is trying to go that way. It's not easy. It requires a number of tools, but also a change in the culture and how we operate.
Right. I mean, I think in that mode, right, the world of sort of buying or developing and installing sort of a black box that's an application, and security is concerned about what's going in and what's going out, doing pen testing, maybe doing some scanning, but by and large isn't necessarily impact how the thing's built, versus a world of microservices and otherwise where that application is now exploded and can be, there's much more transparency into the inner workings, and I think that transparency is very good from a security standpoint, and those practices need to be pushed back. At least there's my moderator opinion.
Great.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think like the lift and shift approach isn't a good one to go with, clearly, and you have to be cognizant of when you're moving to the cloud, what are the best practices within the cloud? Try not to Frankenstein them with the practices that have accrued over decades worth of, potentially patching issues that are constantly cropping up and new threats that emerge. Like there should be some element of a fresh start there.
Yeah, when you're moving legacy workloads and applications to the cloud, it's always hard, right? So the first thinking is, well, maybe I just lift and shift it and maybe be done with it. But I think the problem with that is that you don't truly take advantage of what the cloud has to offer if you just do that, right? So, I think that many of you probably is familiar with this pets versus catals analogy, right? So you want your workloads in the cloud to be catals, not pets, right? So things that we in the traditional data centers, we hold on to them dearly, right? So if they're like pets, right? So if they get sick, you take them to the vet, right? So if the server is having a problem, you go fix it, you go patch it, all the care and feeding and maintenance. But in the cloud, if an instance is having problems, you don't fix it, you just kill it and restart a new instance with the right image, right? So from the one that is fully patched, and so that is a huge change in how we manage the cloud infrastructure. On the application side, I think it's the same, right? Because nowadays application code is not just the web layer. It contains an infrastructure layer in the code as well, right? You got Terraform code in the same repos that deploys all the resources used by that service, right? So, and I think that the shift to really take advantage of this, right, is to reduce the attack surface. Right? If there are things that you don't have to worry about, right, we talk about all these complexities, right? If now there are 100 more things, but out of those 100 more things, if 80 of those you actually don't have to worry about, then that's better, right? So that's why you use serverless functions. Well, let Amazon worry about that. Let Microsoft worry about that, right? You just deploy the functions to Lambdas, and then you worry about the that piece of it. So my CISO and I, we talked a lot about this. How do we change from CIA, right? So the confidentiality, integrity, and availability mindset of security to a DIE mindset, which is distributed, immutable, and ephemeral. Right? If we shift that CIA to DIE more and more, then there's less and less things we have to worry about.
Yeah, no, for sure. Which brings in oftentimes, issues around organizational skill sets, and this is a large shift in development methodology and application architecture methodology in emerging capabilities of the clouds that change oftentimes faster than organizations can take advantage of it, and an area where more and more, obviously there's more and more capable people, but you're coming from a world where people have a couple of decades of wisdom from working, trying, failing, seeing real incidents in the sort of traditional layer to a couple years in or 3 years in on the cloud. So this is an area where I agree with everything you just said. My question back though is that sounds like we're not prepared to do that. Like that sounds like broad changes that we might not have the skill set to pull off. How do organizations deal with that?
Well, I think is the ability to think again about what we know and how we are going to migrate that to the cloud. There are new challenges going back to development. Everything is software, and everything is going to be a script. The infrastructure, even the security is now software, and we need to learn to do it all over again. I think the part of the challenge here is that the amount of data is huge. The new challenges to learning is also a challenge. And I think, I don't want to oversimplify, but automation at different levels is part of the solution. Try to automate testing, try to introduce machine learning to do analytics for security, trying to introduce different levels of scripting for development, security testing in the pipeline, and everything else we can. The challenge here that I want to highlight is the problem is getting bigger, but the security teams may not be getting bigger. So we need to learn new skills to take the challenge.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Go ahead.
I was going to say that, I think people sometimes get surprised about the exponential growth of cyber threats and the exponential growth of cloud, and we should not be surprised at this point. This is just going to keep happening. Things are going to become more and more connected and more available, and there is going to be more and more data. And so we have to provide a solution that is scalable, integrable, and modular, that you can swap out and replace your ML solutions with new state-of-the-art solutions. You go from, okay, we're doing XGBoost today, tomorrow we're going to move on to geometric deep learning, right? So you have to be able to adapt as your threat landscape is growing at the rate. You have to be keeping pace, essentially. And I think cloud is, it's the big indicator that this isn't going to change. It's not going to get any easier. It's never going to get static. It's always going to be growing.
Right. Look, one of the great things about that need for data from the security perspective, is it's needed for application performance. It's needed for health. It's needed for so many different things, and that level of observable systems and data can formulate a lot of different approaches. And sometimes we see fighting for the data because it's being shuttled into one team's platform, another team's platform, and then potentially even duplication of the data. So I've heard it multiple times from all of you, but a strategy around the access to that data, from the different stakeholders, I think is critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, this is a data problem that needs an engineering approach.
Right.
We need
Well
all
said.
security people to become security engineers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, and I think that and look at this as a changing system, one that they can change, but also one that doesn't have to sit there statically, which I for sure think is key. There's a lot of solutions out there, right? For every problem, there's a solution. There's new acronyms every single year for new systems that are going to solve a bunch of this. And if we just do this, or we just do this. And I feel like that's another facet of potential complexity here is the marking of vendors like my company, or your company, or we're all out there trying to help and trying to create solutions. And I think that can be a bit of an overload, and potentially, this isn't about installing a next gen firewall and now you think you're okay. I would imagine there's concern if I bought something and said, okay, I'm sorted now because I bought this new thing that's being sold. You can't walk away from ownership by just deploying a solution. But I'm curious if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I actually think there's way too much complexity when it comes to products, and there's significant overlap among some of them as well. I foresee there will be some amount of a reset of consolidation, because keep going this way is just too overwhelming. It's not sustainable.
Right. No, agreed.
And I want to trust the vendors, because we are getting to the point that there's no point building solutions. We need to just to buy different building blocks, buy services, and we put them together, because the organization wants to focus on the service or product that we are trying to develop.
Yeah.
And there is less interest to do everything that exists in the universe. We need to simplify. And that's one of the reasons to go to the cloud. So we don't take care of the infrastructure or the OS or the patching. And we're trying to build that layer of abstraction between the hardware and the actual product or service that we sell.
Yeah. So we have just a couple minutes left. Curious, just like one last thought or advice from all three of you. I'll go right to left this time. So Erkang.
I think the one thing is keep it simple, right? So security needs to be simple and usable for the organization. Otherwise, people will just find ways to get around it. And focus on doing the basics and doing that really well. Super.
Agreed. Cathal?
Yeah, it's really just, I think it's very good to have diverse vendor solutions bringing in those insights that you need. But I would really stress the kind of last mile insights that you're bringing in your own organization, because those vendors are not going to be talking to each other, and you can bring them together and derive insights from them that's greater than the sum of the parts.
Nice. Marcos, any last thoughts?
There's a lot of work to do. We're getting stuck in the hybrid model. I would invite everybody to just go full speed ahead and try to go cloud native, because the hybrid model, is interim and it's not forever. We need to plan and just go all 100% into the cloud.
All right, all in. So thank all three of you, and I think we touched on a bunch of interesting themes, and I think over and over and over again we discussed this is software. This is there are different architectures and approaches for the services and applications that impact security. So don't just look at your different approach for security. Look at your broader architecture, your broader approach, and design an architect for change and security, and to make sure you have all the data you need to make the right decisions. It's a different mindset, and oftentimes a different skill set, and it's one that is, I think, The differences in conversations I've had with customers and enterprises over the last 3 years from, 3 to 5 years ago, people were still, wait, is the cloud going to be secure? And now it's more operational. Yeah, of course, they're starting to deploy stuff there. Now the questions are, what are the best practices, which are going, tooling, services, architect, all this stuff is going to keep changing. And that's sort of what I want everybody to take home is design and architect for change. So thank you all very much on the panel, and I hope everybody enjoyed.